Hello, everyone. My name is Sheldon Schwitek, coming to you from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Was very grateful and honored to be asked to be a part of the New Jersey Self-Determination Conference, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you a little bit today about circles of support and why they matter. I'd like to take this time to introduce two colleagues who are going to be asking me some questions at the end of this presentation. And then you will all have an opportunity to ask some questions in the live session at the very end of the presentation.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mary Kanor. I am a parent, advocate, and also work with folks with developmental disabilities.
And I'm Christine Klaus. I'm a parent, advocate, and also work with adults with developmental disabilities.
Beautiful. I'm so honored to actually have the two of you here today to help me help people really understand how important circles are. I've been doing this work for probably close to 30 years. I often start my presentations talking about my younger brother who was born with a slight intellectual impairment and had a family who decided to not publicly share his diagnosis. And so my brother managed to go through school, fully included. He's been working at a crate and pallet manufacturing company for the last, I think he got his 17-year service award. And his claim to fame is he's not always the most efficient or quick person on the line assembling things, but he's known to be the most proficient and the most accurate. And so it's a bit of his claim to fame, but it really shaped the way that I think about how we support people and what that looks like. I think to start off, as I talk about circles of support and a thing to remember, and we'll go over some general ideas about what that looks like and how to actually create one. But I want people to keep in the back of their minds that we all have circles of support. We just don't necessarily formalize them in the ways that we try to within the service system. And part of that is really to be able to support people to think about ways in which they can be more connected to their community, and that they have not only their parents or family members looking out for them, that there's actually people in their communities that can support them. So if we think about circles of support, we know that they're really the definition, and this comes from an organization called the Plan Institute in Vancouver, British Columbia, which has been doing circles of support. And sometimes they actually also they're now using the phrase personal networks or personal support networks to think about them. But they started doing and supporting families with circles of support kind of at the very beginning, almost 30 years ago. So they think that are defined it as a group of committed men and women who are in relationship with a person who is isolated and vulnerable by reasons of disability, age, living arrangement, limited opportunities, or societal perceptions. And I think that's a really good overview of what that looks like. It also is a group of people who are intentionally invited to come together in friendship and support of a person with a disability for the purposes of protecting their interests into the future, not with the expectation that this group might have a responsibility for taking care of or caring for the person, but with an expectation that if asked, people might be pleased to make time and agree to join the circle to help look out for the person. And often circles were really created because families were struggling to support their loved ones. And in the more recent future, or the more recent past, it's been people whose families are aging out, and families who can't provide the kinds of supports that they used to for their family members, and they don't want to leave them hanging when they're no longer able to do it. So there's a lot of ways that circles can come about and a lot of reasons why they're important. But what I do know is that it's one way to hold and invite relationship into people's lives. How do we actually find ways to help people be connected to the people around them, and recognizing that that connection brings connections to community and brings connection to a really good life for people. There's lots of reasons why families choose to make them and create circles of support. And sometimes it's not even family. Sometimes it's just people around a person who doesn't have any family, right? But they usually falls to one or two people or a small group of people. And many reasons, right? They just can't make any more decisions about what to do next. They can't do it on their own. And they don't know what's going to happen when they're no longer around. Who's going to be the people who are going to step in and help to take care or support their family member? One of the ways to start to think about how do we pull people together is that, are there unpaid people in a person's life? And often what we know in service land is that most of the connections people have, especially people who have significant support needs, are surrounded by paid supports most of the time. And we recognize that the system isn't necessarily responsible for helping or for making sure a person has a good life. They have a part to play in it, but we all have a part to play in making sure that we have good lives, and the people around us do as well. People organizing a circle also need to believe that there are people who will care about and want to make a contribution to a person's life. And they have to be prepared to make room for others to show up and to be involved in that person's life. This work is pulled from Alet Mansky, who actually started the Plan Institute at the very beginning and has written a number of books, but one of them here is called A Good Life, is where that quote is from. Some other questions to ask yourself is, am I prepared to take some risks, recognizing that a person who requires support is going maybe to make some decisions or do some things that family members or other people might feel risky about, or feel that there is too much risk involved? Are they willing to give up some control to help support the person? Trying to figure out whether people's safety and well-being is going to be compromised. Is there things that are causing anxiety for the family, for the person, and how do we address some of those? And then, is this person and or their family prepared to ask? Are they prepared to even give up control enough to ask people to join, or ask somebody else to ask people to join? Because they can't make any more decisions about what to do next. And I think it's true for all of us, right? At certain points in our lives, we just can't make another decision, or we don't want to make the wrong decision. And so we reach out to the people around us. But families and people who experience disability, but families who experience disability also live lives that can be very isolating. So they don't feel like they have people that they can rush to or turn to help them when they're struggling. I just got off a call today with three parents, all of whom are also professionals and who are thinking about the connection between disability and resources for people of color, and trying to figure out, like, what are the cultural norms that are getting in the way of that. And I think families who experience disability, there are lots of cultural norms that we've been acculturated around about asking for help, about who should take care of it. And the common idea of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps here in the US plays itself out in ways that, again, help to isolate or continue to isolate families. In a world where relationship is the number one safeguard to vulnerable people's lives, circles may offer a beginning place for relationship to take place. Circles have been a good place to learn lessons about building the magic of relationship firsthand. Here in Michigan, I'm actually currently do some consulting work. I've been doing some work with Eros Group in New Jersey, but I'm also the executive director of our local ARC community advocates here in Kalamazoo. And unlike many ARCs, we actually are strictly an advocacy organization. And I took this role on in just 2 years ago. And for me, my passion is really about people living self-determined, connected lives in their communities, and recognizing that circles are a big part of that. So one of the first things I did is I have a number of connections in the state of people who've been doing and utilizing person-centered practices and circle building for decades. And so we've started what we're calling the person-centered planning think tank here in Michigan. And one of the things that came out of those conversations is that if we really wanted people to understand how to develop circles, that we better be up to speed on what it takes, because some of us haven't really facilitated a circle for a number of years. For me, it had been well over a decade. And so we identified somebody here in Kalamazoo who we support through the ARC, and asked them if they'd be willing to help us learn what it took to really pull a circle together. This person is really well connected in the community, really well connected at the state and national level, and the local level, serves on a couple of boards, but also doesn't have very much family involvement, and came to the ARC and asked us if we would help them think about how they could get a political science degree because they're so embedded in the work. And she experiences an intellectual disability, is an amazing self-advocate and an amazing advocate in general. I'm trying to move away from using the definition self-advocate, but she needed a circle because it's going to take a bunch of us some time to help her weed through and go through the steps that it's going to take for her to get a degree, right? She's going to start at community college. We're going to look at university, but we're always looking at it through the lens that she's going to graduate. And I think my favorite part of this conversation with her has been she wanted to get her undergrad in political science, but she's now decided that she needs to get a doctorate. And so just being supported was an opportunity for her to dream her big dream as opposed to the little dream of getting an undergraduate degree. It may take her 2 decades to do that. I don't know what that's going to look like for her, but I want to be on that journey with her because I think it's going to be a very interesting one. And I'm grateful that I have a group of people who understand circles because this is going to be a complex situation. That's true for all circles, right? They all bring things to relationship, right? And so we ask the question, who is a circle for? And I think this is a really important part of the conversation because there are 2 kinds of circles. There is one for a person who needs significant support, but there can also be a circle for the parents or a family member, right? That those are all really important pieces of that. So recognizing at the beginning, we've started another circle for a young man here who's just about to graduate from high school. And what's really evolving right now, because we all know about teenagers at that age of 18, that he may not be as interested in getting advice and support from other people. And it's turning in some ways to be a circle of support for his family and the people who are involved in that, in really providing some family supports to think some things through to help support this young man as he transitions out of high school and into the community and into the job world or continuing his education, whatever he might decide. So when we're developing circles, it's really good to be clear about who the circle is for and to be willing to make some adjustments along the way. So recognizing the circle is still for this young man, but our work right now is really supporting the family to support him. And so that may evolve and change over time. He's trying to invite some people in that's going to make it feel more like his circle rather than his parents. And it's not unusual for circles to split, for a circle to split off and be a support for the family, and then also to be another one that splits off to become a support for the individual. At the end of the day, we want the circle for the individual to take priority, that we're really focused on them as people and making sure that they get their needs met. And that sometimes means not necessarily agreeing with the family, that we may actually think about as a community member and somebody in relationship with the person that, moms and dads are going to be moms and dads their whole lives. Friends have a different role to play. And sometimes that means not necessarily agreeing with the family, right? I love the circles that I've been involved with where peers would look at family members and go, well, I don't know why you're expecting him to do it because there's no way in hell I would be doing that, right? And for that to be a part of the conversation, right? Somebody in the best interest of the person at the center may not agree, and the circle has to grapple with that and find the best solutions along the way. What is the purpose of a circle of support? That's also a good question, right? Is it just about making connections and having friendships with people? Is it about planning? Is it about the person being engaged in their community? Are there other things? a circle can be all of these things, but again, they tend to change over time. Often circles come out of a planning process. Maybe it's a map or a path, or where a group of people have gathered to think about what a future might look like for someone. But often friendship and community engagement are also parts of it, right? Who's willing to show up and be a part of the person's life? What can circle members be expected to do? Again, that's really up to every individual circle member, right? We ask people to kind of sign on for the long term, as long as they possibly can. I think about circles that I was involved in when I lived in Toronto that I'm not involved in any longer, but I made years-long commitments to people. And then even while I was here, I was still a member of circles that were going on. I think about my friend Judith Snow and being a part of her circle, even after I had left Toronto, and then also became an informal member of the circle, right? Where she would call me up and we would have some conversations about what she was doing or thinking about. The other side of that, though, is, of course, she was also one of my circle members. Even though I didn't necessarily have a formal circle, I would be reaching out to her for the same thing. And it often was around support and decision-making. But we want people to make some kind of a commitment, even if it's literally to say, I'm going to show up with help with the planning meeting and do a map or a path, and I'll decide after that, or that's all I have for right now, right? And just remember to keep inviting me, because I may change my mind, right? Or I may find that I have some time to be able to do that. There's no one way to do this, right? That's the thing that I think about. The other question that we often get asked when we're talking about circles is, who should we invite? And I think this goes back to many of you in the sector will recognize these ideas of circles and connections, right? This is another way to think about relationships. Who are the people in each of these sections of a person's life, right? Who's the most intimate? Who are the people they most depend on? Who are they friends with? Who do they have some relationships with? Many people might be in, being part of some kind of day program or day activity. Are there people there that they're connected to who we could invite? And then I also think about those circles of participation. And do the people belong to some kind of a sports team? Do they go to a craft night? Do they belong to their church? Are they, helping to lead a Sunday school class, or do they just show up every week, or are they part of the choir? Who are the people that we can ask to be a part of that? And then that last circle, that circle of exchange, is really about where money changes hands, and often the service world or the service provision world ends up in that. But I think we have to look outside of that when we think about circles of exchange, particularly for people who experience disability, in recognizing that we can be intentional about and miss the relationships that people have in their own lives for connection, right? Who cuts their hair for them? Who's their dentist? Who do they make connections with at the doctor's office, right? Is there somebody at the front desk who is very intentional about connecting with somebody and what that might look like? So all of these circles have opportunities. And I would say, if you're starting a circle, can you find one person in each of those circles of relationship to invite in? And it may feel really risky, but I always fall back on the idea that my friend Tom Kohler had, which is that most of the time we forget that people want to notice us struggling, or our family struggling if we're connected, and they're just waiting to be asked, what can they do? And this is a really simple way. Can you show up once a month or once every couple of months and help us think about how to make sure we have a good life for Joe, right? That is a pretty small commitment. Maybe there's some other things that grow out of that, but at the beginning, it can be as simple as that. So there, again, are just some examples of that, right? And what we know often for people who experience disability is that those circles, the exchange circle is the one that's pretty full of people. But I think we miss opportunities if we don't look to that circle of exchange and invite people in. That circle that the think tank is helping support probably a third of the people are connected to that person through service provision, but there are a number of them who have or continue to evolve in their relationship. Somebody who was just her supports coordinator and has moved on to another job and moved actually and lives in a different town. She lives in Grand Rapids, which is just north of here, but who's made a commitment to be a friend of Sarah's and to continue to show up and be a part of her circle. So again, asking people who might be unlikely suspects. And fortunately, this person's circle, she's really good at asking people. And so people are showing up, right? And we need to get better at asking them and asking people around us. So the other thing I think we forget, and this is something that my friend Shelley always points out when we're talking about circles, is sometimes you can give up the asking to somebody else too. You can just come up with the list or the thinking and say, because it's way easier if I was on a circle, it's probably way easier for me to ask if you want to be a part of somebody's life or somebody's circle, because I don't have so much invested and I'm okay with hearing the word no. For some family members, that can be really crushing because they've heard no so many times. Like I said, in community, people are just waiting to be asked. Tom Kohler was the executive director for the Chatham-Savannah Citizen Advocacy Network and worked really hard to help get people back into their communities, but did it in a way that actually he continued to map his community and ask people to actively participate in people's lives. So they weren't creating group homes. He was helping make connections between people who he thought were like-minded and then help them to continue to be in the community. So figuring out roommate situations, a family adopted somebody that they met through Tom's work. And so there's lots of ways that could look. For those of you who really would love to hear a good story of how he did that work, there's a book through Inclusion Press called Wadi Welcome. And February is traditionally a time that many of us do a reading of that. So I'm actually going to have my staff read Wadi Welcome at our next staff meeting as part of our own professional development and to honor Black History Month, because Wadi was definitely a mover and a shaker in his own community because people figured out how to support him. What are the roles for circle members? We know that there's a person at the center, right? That they're the focus person. We know that there are other circle members that we are going to invite in. It's helpful often for circles to identify a facilitator. One of the things we're experimenting with here in Kalamazoo County is actually a person-centered coach who is really has become the facilitator for the circle that the think tank is working on. She's a part of the think tank, but has been credentialed to do some, oh my God, what do we call it? It just slipped out of my mind. It'll come to me in a minute. But to do some facilitation, often that's just a specific, independent facilitation. There's the word I'm looking for. To do some independent facilitation, but have expanded that to be this person-centered coach that helps to facilitate circles along with doing some planning, et cetera, over time. It's something we're experimenting with and trying to figure out how to do as well. Fortunately for us, our local community mental health organization is very accepting and willing to experiment and figure out how to bring some of these modalities of support and connection to community into the circle, or into circles and into planning for people. But then there's lots of other roles, and they could be formal or more informal, right? Who's the note taker? My friend Marsha Forrest would say no meeting should take place without food showing up. So who's going to help figure out what food is going to look like? Who's going to be the event organizer? Who's going to monitor the birthdays of everybody in the group, not just the person at the center? Is there someone who's going to help to chauffeur people who might not be able to make it without some support? Who's going to handle communications? Is there a social media component to what they decide to do or want to do? Who's going to host the meeting? who's going to be the party planner. All of these become questions and roles that people can play that can take a lot of time or next to no time at all. But they're all, and circles will find their ways to these. But these are all things that people can think about, right? And when you're inviting somebody, you can say, like, who's the good party animal? Who's the person who loves to organize things, right? Who's the good cook? Or who's the person who's really good at asking people or identifying, how do we have like a nice little meal prior to, or what are the snacks going to look like for the circle meeting? Those are all become really important roles. Roles are particularly powerful circles because without them, members can get lost, and the lack of clarity can lead to the circle dissolving. And I think, Mary, we talked a little bit about that in our pre-planning around the idea that I think both of you have had some kind of or some semblance of a circle for your family members, and that it did fall to the wayside. And sometimes a paid facilitator is a way to go, or identifying somebody who's willing to facilitate the circle over time, because then the responsibility doesn't fall again on just the parents. So, and circles can have an ebb and a flow. They can have people leaving and coming back in. And I feel like that's true for the circle that I helped to facilitate for my friend Matt, along with Judith Snow, when I lived in Toronto, is that the circle ebbed and flowed over time. That circle was in existence for a decade before I left, and different people showed up all the time. So I think the truth is, though, that the most important role in a circle is for people to be friends of the people at the center. And that friendship definition is one that I think gets to be defined by the two people, right? How do you show up and be a friend and be supportive? Because if I think about my own personal circle, all of those people are my friends, and they all play different roles when I reach out to them, right? I don't have a formal circle gathering, although when I attended the Toronto Summer Institute, I would regularly, every couple of years, would gather some of those people to be a part of a path or a map if I was deciding to do some futures planning. And then, now in the digital age, we've done a number of circles where some of those people who were far away and couldn't participate now get to participate in those plans, right? We have ways of doing that. I've done a number of paths in New Jersey with Jen through COVID, where we had some people meeting in person and we had people on a big screen television so that we could include them and figure out how to make that, because people wanted to be a part of it, right? People are there because they choose to be in an unpaid relationship with the person at the center. That's what it really boils down to. Even the people in the circle I was talking about who are paid are showing up after work, and it's not a paid relationship at that point, right? They bring their expertise, but they come because they are connected to that person and they want to participate as a friend. I shared all of my personal experiences, so I'm not going to go deep into that, but a circle of support can be the difference between living on the edge of a community and active inclusion and participation. It can be a person's strongest foundation to a meaningful future. And in my 30 years plus of doing this work, I think that is the key, and is that it becomes a foundation for connection and the opportunity for people to fully participate in their communities. I think, again, I was talking to the two of you about my own brother and the struggle, and maybe I didn't. I've been talking about it a lot. It's on my mind right now, is figuring out how to support my brother who lives in Manitoba and I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, who actually does need a circle because our dad has passed away. My mom lives further away. She's aging. And we really need to identify what are some supports going to be in place. So this doesn't go away. And I speak to it from professional expertise, but I also speak to it from personal experience, that it is an incredibly valuable tool. And I think one of the most valuable tools in helping people live self-directed lives, because our self-direction comes from us reaching out to the people around us who we know, love, and trust and are in relationship with to help us make some of the biggest decisions in our lives, as well as the small everyday ones. And so now we can get to some of our questions. So just give me a second. I'm going to turn off this other screen, and then you'll be able to see all of us.
I don't know which one this is.
I'll start.
Okay.
Stop sharing. And we're going to leave that meeting. There we go. Awesome.
There we go.
Thank you, Sheldon. That was like
Hey.
very, very good.
Yes.
Actually, a very simple question. And that is, will your slides for this presentation be available for download?
Yeah, actually, I can make them available, and I will provide that information at the live session, but I can definitely put them on my consulting website in the company of others. We'll make sure that there's a link there to them.
Terrific. Because I think even listening to, having done some work with you, just preparing for this conference, you hit a lot of good points that people probably won't just remember by listening to you.
Yeah.
So we should make sure that happens, and that there's some reference on the live session for us to be able to access your company website.
Definitely.
Did you have? Sorry.
Well, the question I have that I still not sure about is, we did have a circle. So we did have a circle, but the person who was the facilitator lived far, and it just never got off the ground. And I'm not quite sure where to begin on how to get it going again. So any suggestions? And they now have a lot of people in their lives that they didn't, my sons. So, and they didn't when we were doing the first circle. So I have some people in mind, but I just would love to hear any pointers that you would have.
Well, I think recognizing who they're connected to, right? Which you already said, there's a number of people. I don't know if you're trying to restart a circle that it's necessary to identify the facilitator right away.
Yeah.
I think inviting people in is the key, and then being explicit about some of that, like that we're going to need someone who's going to take on the role of being the facilitator, and using the notes that I had of all the different roles that can be on the thing. And maybe in the beginning it is a parent who's doing some of that stuff, but over time finding the right person. And the thing that I have discovered in this work more than anything else has been that people, if you put it out, will show up to fill up the space. They will show up and identify themselves as being willing to be a part of it. But don't have any blinders about who it is you invite.
Okay.
Literally, if you feel there are connections with people, you should be inviting them, whatever it might look like.
Very good.
And don't be afraid to ask them more than once, right? They might say no, and then you go have a couple of meetings and you'd be like, we really think that you would have something valuable to offer, to be able to ask them again, right? Some of the work that I did here in Michigan was really around a culture of gentleness. So how do you recognize the gifts of people, and then how do you build them up, right? You don't have to badger people, but you can say, I know you're really great at this thing, and this thing. And I think we need some of that in the life of my son. So we would love to have you come.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. That's very good.
You kind of answered this question I was going to ask, which is, any advice when you have like a parent that's trying to start this on their own? They're kind of like, for example, Sheldon, I live in a very rural area. Yeah. So there are no sidewalks. The speed limit's 45 and everybody's 3 acres or more. Yeah. So, it's kind of hard to invite people. So like, even when you do invite people, you said it before, sometimes you kind of, you don't want to hear the rejection. You're so desperate, and you, it's almost shies you away. You're like, okay, I tried this. This isn't working, or this is too overwhelming. So kind of fold question here. How does somebody like a parent, single parent in particular, stay motivated? What would your advice be to them? Sorry for the dogs.
Yes.
All right.
But what would be your advice?
This is culture. It's fine. So it makes me think about a number of things, right? Like I get living in a more rural and more spread out area, but I'm imagining that there's I've spent a lot of time in different parts of New Jersey now in the last couple of years that I think almost 3 years that I've been coming there. And I look at Jen and the work that she's doing at Eros Group, but I also look at Jen and the way she is in her own community, right? She's lived in New Jersey all her life, but she's lived in the location she's lived in for not a very long for quite a long time. And so she has connections, right? She knows all of her neighbors. There's a neighbor that she would never think of going over to and asking for help, right? Like that's already known. The community knows that, right? The community knows that that's not the person whose door you're going to knock on. But two other families that live fairly close, they do know, right? I actually sat around a campfire in this fall, and got to meet some of her neighbors because they just showed up, right? They were like, oh, you got a fire going? Well, you're just getting back from a date. We'll come by and have a drink with you, right? And so it's looking at those little places, right? We just did a workshop there, and the place that she wanted to do it was going to be too far, and she didn't really want to spend any money. And so she went down to one of the local restaurants who doesn't open up until 2:00 and said, could we use your space? What would you charge us to use your space for a 4-hour meeting for a couple of days before you open the restaurant? And he was like, well, come down and talk to me. And she came down, and he handed her the key, and he said, just make sure everything's back to the way it was at 2:00 when we open, and it's yours. And she's like, well, what do I owe you? He's like, I don't know. Just give me something nice. Like, you decide what it's going to look like. Right. And so I think it is just recognizing what relationships we have, right? Do you go to the local, there it's Dunkin' Donuts. Like, do you go to Dunkin' Donuts? Do you know somebody on a regular basis? Like, those are people who might be willing to come and hear what you're struggling with, and to hear who your son or daughter is, and to help think about that. And I think about that also, right? How do we be intentional about creating community around people? Sometimes it's just showing up in the same place regularly. Is there a grocery bagger who you see all the time when you go buy groceries, right? And maybe they don't live right next door, but from what I know about New Jerseyites, they're willing to travel. They travel all over the state to be connected to the people they care about. So there's that piece of it as well. And then figuring out the Zoom component. I mean, I think in person is critical, but you can figure out a Zoom component where people can at least be able to chime in if they can't make a particular meeting. So don't let geography get in the way of it either.
So the second part of the question is it okay to start your circle with just a few people and then build?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's worthwhile.
I think anything to get momentum is going to be helpful.
Okay.
To be perfectly honest. And if it's a small group of people, the circle that I talked about for the young man right now, it's actually him, his mom and his dad, his aunt and uncle, another aunt, and then an old family friend who's connected to him, who knows that he has some connection. So that's what it started with, right? The young man's decided that he's got a friend he wants to invite in, and he started seeing a therapist, and he asked his therapist to join the conversation, right? And she's coming not as his therapist, she's coming as somebody who's a community member, right? Like, she's identifying herself as that, not what goes on between them in therapy is not what she's coming to provide to the group. She's coming to the group to provide some support for him because she cares about him at the end of the day.
Very good. And I have one, what if, and I've worked with a few people like this, people who have no one. So you move someone out of one of the local institutions and their family is either dead or gone or lost touch over, the many, many years they've been in the facility. And really, they may only have connection to staff. Now, I know I realize staff could be invited. That would be one thing. But any suggestions, but especially in such an isolated environment as that, any suggestions how to get one off the ground?
I think you have to build on the connections the person already has. So if that is, but it's a different kind of ask. So there's obviously some supports coordination that would be involved. Yes. There's obviously some medical professionals or an agency who's involved, as well as staff.
Mhm.
I think staff are an incredibly valuable resource around some of that because they know the person fairly well. When they first move out, it probably isn't going to work for them to have a circle, right? But as staff gets to know them, then you say to the staff people, is there somebody you know who you feel like might just click with this person, right? Someone in your own life who you'd be willing to invite. For me, the thing I think is critical in all of this is to be as creative as possible and to not worry about whether they're deep connections or not.
Okay.
I think about some of the people I supported when I worked at a group home, and two of them, my friend George and my friend Scott, were both big flirts when they were out in community in their own ways, and I could imagine finding people that way.
Yeah.
And so I apologize, Sheldon. We are up in time.
Yeah.
So thank you so
you.
much
Yes.
for everything you've taught us today, and any information that you can share. Thank you for the work you do.
Yes. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. I look forward to answering some more questions at the live part of all of this. So thank you all.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.